Here we go. We're going to just make one more comment about leadership styles, and then we're going to move on to another subject. And I've drawn each of those spectrums a certain way, with like one quality on the right hand, one quality on the left hand. You could draw it either way, and don't think that, like for the different qualities that we're talking about, that one trait on one scale necessarily matches up with another trait on another scale. Does that make sense? It's possible to have a person who does not discuss things a lot, but has top-down decision making, but he's still a delegator. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't mean that he's going to be, detail, wants to have his hands on every detail, even though he's making his own decisions. And someone who is very detail-oriented may not necessarily be production-oriented. So I'm just saying, just realize that those different traits can come in varying packages. And I think we're going to close that subject and move on to the next one. And God help us with this. So what I wanted to say is that we've talked about this earlier in the course, where influence can be used and misused, and how we communicate is very important. And that was, I think, part of your last exam. I forget where it came. I wanted to talk about the pastor's secretary, and I want to talk about the pastor's wife as a specific example, and potentially a very sort of tricky example of how at times influence can be misused, or not, maybe misuse is the word, but have an effect that is not so positive. And as I was thinking about like influence today, I was just asking myself, okay, so what is influence, and how is it exercised? And I'm not saying you need to write these definitions down, but I want you to be able to think about it, is that all of us have influence, okay? There's things I do or say that affect the behavior of other people. If I'm sitting on a bus, okay, bus full of strangers, and I look out the window and I say, "What's that?" Okay, every head on that bus is going to turn and look out that window. There's an experiment you can do. It's kind of funny. You just stand on a city street and just look up. Soon people gather around you looking up, wondering what you're looking up at. So there's things that we can do that affect people. And why that is, I'm not sure I can define it very well. But something that is very important to me that can be communicated, I think other people's tendency, other people's first response is that is important to me also, because I think we're social beings, and that's just how we relate. Some of this stuff is so obvious to us because we grow up with it, we don't even think about it. And then it's almost like we have to make decisions, we have to take a stand not to be influenced by other people, because, like I said, for the same reasons. So like when Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, or when I'm walking down the street and they're trying to hand me, a Watchtower tract, for me, it's like a violent act of the will to pass by those people, because I don't. It's uncomfortable. I know what the Bible says. I do it on purpose, but normally I'm gonna take what people hand me, And I think maybe that's a little good example of how what we're thinking, what we communicate, it influences other people. It's hard for me to say no to panhandlers or beggars on the street. Oh, my heart goes out to people. I want to give them money. I have a personal opinion or conviction that, at least in Baltimore City, this may not be true at all in other societies, but in this place, I think probably 90 to 95% of that money is going to make drug purchases. That's what I believe about it. I've known panhandlers. They told me, they had the whole thing down: the shoes, the sign, the clothing, and they would earn $50 to $200 a day to support the drug habit. You may disagree with that. Maybe you've been starving to death and panhandling yourself. I'm just saying, because I have that conviction, I do not give money to people who come up to me on the street. But it's hard for me not to do it, which is we have to choose not to be influenced. So all of us have influence. And that influence can come in like different forms, but usually it's through conversation. It's like the expressing of an opinion, you know? And I say to, my friend Kanat, geez, it's not right that this is happening, it should be done this way instead. And then he, because he's a social being, will want to, maybe he'll disagree, but he generally want to agree. He said, you're right, I think you're right about that. And then the next step after that is, how come, whose decision is that anyway? And who has the power to change this thing you're talking about? And then the next step is, why aren't they changing it, And then we gather other people to start expressing our view, and if you gather enough people, the person in power will lose his ability to be in power unless he does something, unless he meets that need that's coming from these people. And that's politics. That's what politics is. Gathering a party to advance a view and persuading people that it's important enough for them to put their time and effort into, and that ends up affecting the people who can actually do something about it. And I'm not saying politics is good or bad. It is what it is, Who's a successful politician? People vote for him. The guy who gets the votes, he's a success, And that same thing on a smaller scale, without becoming full-blown, happens every day in a church, because we're people. And, we come in here and some nights this room is cold. Am I going to touch that thermostat? Hey, is anybody else cold? And then some people, but you're, generally your first response is, gee, Pastor Taggart's cold. Yeah, it is cold in here. And some of you say that just because you love me and want to agree with me. But then other people who are someone who really is hot will say, I'm really hot. But it kind of, but if three other people have said it's cold in here, then for the third person or fourth person to say, gee, it's hot, it's like that takes a step, because you're going against the group. And so that's how influence happens. An opinion is stated, and we talked about this before. I know we and it's not all coming back into my mind right now, but why, we talked about why a policy would be broken, and we could say the same thing about why an opinion would be repeated and multiplied, and it has to do with, am I happy with what's going on? And if I'm unhappy, that might tend more to get things going. And so but there's also the idea that a person with undefined authority can use that authority consciously or unconsciously to influence outcomes. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I walked into the cafe, and I'm looking at that missionary meal for $2.75, and I'm always thinking about how to increase sales in the cafe, because that's one of my jobs here, is to make that business work from a business level. And so I got Lana Rafferty standing behind the counter, and I say, Lana, why don't we have a supersized missionary meal? So you get like twice as much, but we don't double the price. We sell it for $4.25. Okay, now I got a party gathering around me for this. But because I'm Pastor Taggart, maybe not, I realize that puts Lana in a little bit of uncomfortable, or it could put her in an uncomfortable position. Because she's in there working for Janet, I've bypassed Janet and expressed an opinion to Lana. I meant no harm by it. All I'm thinking is, I'm very interested in people's opinions. Lana, do you think that would work? You're working here every night. If you think it would work, tell me, and I'll go to Janet with it. If you think that idea is a loser or a dog, it won't go anywhere from here. But I was just focus grouping it. But the way she said, Pastor Taggart, that's something you'd have to talk to Janet about. You know what I'm saying? And in one sense, I want to give her a lot of credit. Instead of putting a sign up, Pastor Taggart said, and doing stuff, she said that's something for Janet. So she's following the chain of command. She could have looked at it the other way and said to herself, Pastor Taggart would never go outside of the chain of command, we can talk about these things freely. And, Pastor Taggart, I think it's a good idea, or I don't know, or let me think about that, and I'll get back to you. So she could have handled it that way. And again, I'm not faulting her, but this is what happens when a person of influence steps into an area that and of course I have some authority there, so that's maybe not the best example, but that's the type of dynamics that can happen, okay? So I want to talk about two individuals. On the negative side, the dynamics I'm about to talk about are not presently active in Greater Grace World Outreach. It's a disclaimer. I'm speaking potentially. I've seen it in other churches happen, maybe not on purpose. I don't think on purpose. But I've seen it happen in ways that I thought was not the most positive. And those two individuals are the pastor's wife, okay, and then the pastor's secretary, okay? And the pastor's wife is in like an unassailable situation. You know what I'm saying? There's an order for removing a pastor from a church, right? We have that in our bylaws. You can get rid of a pastor. Sorry to use that sort of slang term there. You can remove a pastor, but you cannot remove a pastor's wife. She is untouchable because she is, unless he removes her, or she removes herself, but no one here can remove that individual. And furthermore, because of the sanctity of marriage, because of the respect for the pastor, nobody here wants to even touch that person. You know what I'm saying? And I'm glad. I'm glad that generally speaking, I think most of us just have it in our minds that we're going to respect the pastor, and we're also going to do it by respecting his wife, And we, in the same way, we're not going to say a word about Pastor Schaller. At least for me, even more so, I'm not going to say a word about the pastor's wife. I would never do that. In the rough and tumble of just administration here, it's possible in a certain situation I could say that, Pastor Schaller thought this, I was thinking a little bit different. That could come out of me. I hope it wouldn't be, for the wrong reasons, but that could come out of me, And Pastor Schaller encourages that. It's awesome working for him under his supervision. But I would never say that about Lisa Schaller, because I just don't want to leave something hanging out there that the atmosphere could grab and run with, okay? So and furthermore, because get this one, because I don't want to get in trouble with the pastor. Also, if the pastor's wife were to walk into a situation and say something that offer some opinion about a certain situation, I personally would be very slow to respond in any way other than yes, ma'am. Now, so let's just turn it around. You put me, I'm working behind the counter at the cafe, and the pastor's wife walks in and says, geez, wouldn't it be a great idea to supersize the missionary meal? For $4.25, you get twice as much, or $4 or something. And, and that opinion could be expressed very, in some cases, very strongly, like it's bothering her. Maybe that's not the best example, but maybe let me give you another example. There's some safety hazard in the church, something in the hallway, and I'm sitting there and I'm working for security or hospitality, and the pastor's wife walks by and says, oh my goodness, that table's sticking out there. Some child could hit his head on it. This is very, very dangerous, And if I'm out there working security and saying, we need to do something about this, I probably would have it in me to immediately rush over and do something about it on the spot, And it's just because I don't want to say to her, go talk to tech ops, because she does not have a role. She does not have a role in the organization. All she is a body member, And there's not this, put a suggestion in the suggestion box. I mean, that's the venue for it. But again, that specific individual, I'm just not going to say that. I'm not going to say that to that person. Maybe I should. Maybe I shouldn't. It's like, okay, ma'am, you know what? I was thinking about that. You know what? Maybe I would have it in me if I was fast enough, in my thought process and like having a good day, like I wasn't fatigued or something, maybe I could pull it off. And I would say, you know what, Mrs. So-and-so, I was thinking that same thing myself last week. I'm going to put a suggestion in the suggestion box, and I'm going to sign my name to it. Would you do that also? So if multiple suggestions come in, they'll get the idea this is important. Maybe I would have the grace to say that, but there'd be a little bit of fear in me. Again, nothing to do with Lisa Schaller, but just because of situations I've been in. There'd be a little bit of nagging fear in me that I was taking a risk of offending somebody who just wanted to make things happen because she was unhappy. Okay? Why am I spending time explaining this? Because I want you to be aware of it, that there's certain sensitivities around that specific individual that I think that we as body members and as staff need to be aware of and make accommodations for. And then on the other hand, if you ever, or we have a number of ladies in this class, someday you're going to be in that situation where maybe you're married to an overseeing pastor, and that your words, even if you don't intend it, will carry weight with people and have an effect that you may not even intend, you know? And that's why we have to be careful. And I think that people, I mean, even me, I mean, not even me, but I just, you know, I'm like, you know, what's my role in the church? I'm the, you know, chief financial officer. In terms of the operations of the church, it's really Pastor Schaller, Pastor Lange, and me. We meet weekly, and a lot of stuff happens in that room. You know, Pastor Schiavelli really functions as an assisting pastor. He'll counsel Pastor Schaller, but he's not like in that room. So I've got like, there's a lot of things that I can make happen, or in that meeting I have influence. That's what I'm there for. I got those two guys here, and we make decisions, and I don't have the final word, but if I push for something, you know, I'm influencing those gentlemen, and you know, certain part of them, they don't want to be overruling me, so I've got influence there. So when I leave that room, if I were to walk into any other department in the church and say something, it's like it could have that same effect on people. So I feel like I have to be more careful than your average body member. Like if someone even say to me, gee, what do you think of that, Pastor Taggart? I might not answer that question. You know, that's, you know, I understand what you're saying there. I wonder, you know, what I would recommend, if you want to follow that up, I would send an email to this person, you know, but I wouldn't state an opinion on it, because it's not my job to veto the idea, and it's not my job to approve it, you know, and it's not my job to even state an opinion, because it might have the effect on that individual of creating like a party spirit. So they pass the idea on, it gets shot down by their department head or something, and they know that Pastor Taggart thought this was a good idea, and now it's being shot down, you know. And this happens with security all the time, Wesley. Not so much anymore because they've gotten the message. But it used to happen that specific officers, during the course of the day, they'd be going through their procedures. Pastor Taggart, do you want this door unlocked? I'm not going to answer that question. You guys have a piece of paper that tells you what your job is. Yeah, I have input into that piece of paper, but I'm simply not going to use my, you know, whoever I am to make on-the-fly decisions about what your job should be, because you're not the only person doing your job. Someone else is going to be doing it tomorrow. I don't know if it's the right thing. I got to get the department head, you know, Major Viator involved with it. It's a team decision. Even though you would do what I tell you to do, I'm not going to do it unless the valid exception, breaking policy, is a bona fide emergency. Okay? A decision has to be made. The whole command team is not there, and yes, I will take command, you know, once a year where that happens, you know, because and we'll just get the job done, and then we'll deconstruct it later, whether it was right or wrong. But I'm saying that same influence can be exercised unknowingly by the wife of the pastor. So she wants to be, and it's similar but different with the secretary. Similar in the sense that it is a known fact that this woman sits with Pastor Schaller, obviously is trusted by him. Much sensitive information comes across her desk, like, because the pastor has such a large job that he can't, she's reading emails, all that type of stuff is happening. So she knows everything that is going on in the church, okay? And so if she wanted to, she could use that information in certain ways. And she needs to be wise not to overstep her authority, and other people need to be wise not to put her in a situation where she would be tempted or to overstep her authority. And also the pastor has to be careful not to put her in a situation that maybe she should not be in. And now if you wanted, we have this term secretary, we have this term administrative assistant, okay? And we tend to overlap them, you know what I'm saying? But they really are two different things. Secretary is handling clerical details, answering the phone, filing, passing messages back and forth. That's what she does, keeping track of stuff. An administrative assistant can be assisting the pastor with it, but an administrative assistant can be an administrator in his or her own right. Like maybe there's some area of delegation that's been given to that individual. Okay? Yes, sir. Is that Pastor Steve and drugs or no? I would define. Yeah, I'm not sure of his job title. I think he is an aide to the pastor. I do know that he does administrate church services on Pastor Schaler's behalf. Anything that's going on out there, I don't go to Pastor Schaler, I go to Pastor Steve. It's up to him if he wants to take it to Pastor Schaler. And then there's other certain, maybe a few other situations like that that Pastor Steve has. I also know he spends a lot of time with Pastor Schaler, so he has influence because he has a seat at the table. But lots of times when they walk out of that room, the decision's coming from Pastor Schaler to other people with their fingers on the button. You know what I'm saying? So it's like an interesting, he's like almost like a confidant or a consultant to Pastor. That's how I would view it. But again, don't quote me and get me in trouble. I mean, ask him what his job is. See how he defines it, because I might have it right or wrong. Yeah, I mean, the title we give him is Chief Operating Officer. Okay, Pastor Schaler is the Chief Executive Officer. Pastor Lange is the Chief Operating Officer. I'd be the Chief Financial Officer. You know, so I've got my department, certain things that are given to me, but I really view my role as to communicate across and up to Pastor Lange and Pastor Schaler the business ramifications of the decisions they're making. That's how I view it. You know, so that's what goes on there. So. Now the secretary, unlike the pastor's wife, her job is to handle the communications for the pastor. Okay? And the way she handles those communications, she can, if she chooses to, and maybe unknowingly, I'm not saying it has to necessarily be evil or bad intent, but the way she handles it, she can expand that to start influencing outcomes, you know? And that's when she has to be careful, that's when the pastor has to be careful, and that's when we who work with the pastor's secretary have to be careful, you know? And I've learned, and I've learned this from Pastor Lange, you know, that like if I'm in a room where people who are close to Pastor Schaler start making comments like, well, Pastor Schaler would want this, you know, and I haven't heard it from Pastor Schaler, you know, it's like, hey, well, let's give him a call. You know what I'm saying? And that immediately pops the balloon, you know what I'm saying? But you got to have, you know, guts and courage to do that sometimes because, you know, here's the guts you have to have. You got to have the guts to get on the phone with the pastor, ask him, and if he says it's exactly the way this person said it, and in fact this person has that authority, you got to be able to take that, eat it, and walk out of there fine, not like bothered by it, you know what I'm saying? But if that's going to affect you in such a way, oh my God, I just got smacked down and I'm less of a person, and that gives you mental problems, and you're mad that other person got his way, you got to be way past that to operate in this field. But again, that's why we have an administration class. That's why we have gifted administrators in some cases here, and that's why we've got body members and team members. You cannot allow that undefined authority to start swaying your actions and swaying the outcomes and how you conduct your life. You got to get real quick back over to defined authority. Okay? You know, pastor, so and so said this. did that come from you? And, sometimes in Greater Grace World Outreach, yeah, I did have that conversation. So-and-so grabbed me in the hallway, and I told him to go ahead with it, okay? So that's like question number one. Did this come from you? Okay? And then question number two, the fact that this came from you, pastor or leader, whoever you are, was it your intent that we break policy or protocol A, B, and C to make it happen? Or did you, because the way it's happening right now, this person's running with it, we can let him, but he's walking on the following four people in their jobs. Is that what you wanted to have happen? And in some cases, yes. The pastor will say, I just want this to happen. Let him go. I'm saying, I don't want to mess with it. And we're in this situation from time to time, So if I walk into that room with my own bias, like I'm mad at that person because he got past me and I didn't know about it, like I don't want anything to happen on this property without it going through me, without me knowing about it. You can have that, because you're insecure, like you feel your influence is being diminished. If I have an agenda to see that person stopped in his tracks, and I go to the pastor and it's not stopped, it's like, again, I gotta be very careful about getting myself charged before I go and talk to the pastor. And as I'm growing in my job after having done it for 7 years, I'm learning not to get myself charged so much. But in the early days, you see me once in a while get wound up about stuff I shouldn't. So Taya won't admit it, because she's kind, but it's true. But I'm learning. I'm learning. Now wait a minute. Let's just see what this is, and let's take it. But I've been in situations, and not with Leah Moore, and I even forget with who in the past. But I know there was a situation where a certain decision was presented, and I said, gee, that's going to cost a lot of money, and so-and-so said, I think Pastor would want this to happen, Well, let's go ask him, I'm saying. And then I was in another situation, and I just really felt bad. But there was, now, so I'm glad I'm coming to this one. Now, there may be some churches, and maybe it's not so much the churches, it's more the individual, especially in a small church, where the pastor's wife, just because she's the pastor's wife doesn't mean she can't have a job, doesn't mean she can't have a role in the church, that doesn't disqualify you. Maybe she's gifted at what she does. Maybe she's a very good educator. She gets put in charge of the Christian school. Maybe she's a musician, and she's going to be, Pastor Morrison's worship leader is Don Morrison, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. That's defined authority. But I would say in that situation, remember how we talked earlier, like everything an employee needs to know, number 6 or 7, what is my recourse? Okay, it's just that a church in that situation would serve itself well by making it very clear that the pastor's wife, who happens to have this job, is not the final word. I don't want, just because I'm so-and-so's wife doesn't mean my decisions can't be questioned, challenged. It doesn't mean you can't go over my head if you really think I'm in the wrong. And also, the pastor being up there doesn't mean he's got to listen. He's got to be able to entertain. If there's problems in the ranks, he cannot make his wife an untouchable department head. At Greater Grace, we have no untouchable department heads. Everybody's life gets messed with from time to time. It does. And then when you start messing with people's lives, they start using words like micromanagement, And why that happens is because people have had a certain amount of room, and then you step in and start touching that room, and it's uncomfortable because people's, it might be their flesh, or it might just be, like who they are before God is tied up in a role in which they've been effective and fruitful, and now that's being touched. Oh my God, who am I? Like all this amazing job I think I've been doing maybe wasn't so amazing, that it bothers people. So that's the pastor's wife. She can have a role. She can and should, depending on her temperament, makeup, calling, and delegation that's given to her. But outside of that role, she just has to be very careful how she exercises that influence and not put people into situations that's difficult for them. And then on the other side, how do we treat the pastor's wife? You know, you've been there, and people have come to you and tried to get to the pastor through you. You know, they don't have the relationship with him or the guts to go and talk to him, so they come to you. You know, what's Pastor Loughborough think about this? Can you tell Pastor Loughborough this for me? That type of thing. And so it's just a very difficult job, you know, to be married to that man. And I just think you got to just have a clear conscience, be a happy person, and just have a, purpose in your heart that you're just not going to let these things get to you. You know what I'm saying? So people come to you, what's Pastor so-and-so thinking about this? I did have a conversation with him about it, but I don't think he's made up his mind. You got to talk to him about it, you know? I have no idea what he's thinking about. Even if you know exactly what he's thinking about it, I have no idea what he's thinking about it. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't confide in me. I'm his wife, and I'm glad to be here, but he doesn't, run the church through me, so I don't know what's going on here. And then the other side of it, that's not true in every marital situation. Are we holding up okay here? I got a couple yawners, and I know I'm going on here, but I'm with you. It's okay to yawn. I just want to make sure I'm not going to push you over the edge here. And I have an opinion about this also, and your opinion may be different, and it may be the right one, and I think it's really individual. Me and my job, I tell my wife nothing, okay? When I go home, how was your day? I had a great day, I had a bad day. If there's stuff that we can all be glad about, like, we just bought a new bus or something, I could share that with her. Or if I have some testimony about how awesome Taya Cortalainen is, I can tell her that. But in terms of the details of the administration of the church, she doesn't know anything, okay? And that's the way I handle it. And I don't mean to say that self-righteously. And the reason that is because I barely have grace for these details. It's like for me to hold it together in the course of a week, it takes God, for me to walk through the week. And every day, what goes across my desk, there's like potential damage, and I just got to keep focused. So if I start sharing this stuff with her, I barely have grace for it. She doesn't have grace for it because she's not in that role, and now I got to come up with grace for her to get her through a situation I just put in her mind. It's like, well, I just can't be doing that. Now, I believe in some cases that some women are built differently, and that their husbands confide a lot of what goes on in the ministry in their wives. I think it definitely happens in a pioneering situation where you and your wife and two other people out there starting a church. She's part of the team. She's going to know everything that goes on. And I also think that I could count on my wife she knows me better than I know myself in some situations. She knows areas that are unwise for me to delve into, and maybe she can keep me out of a lot of trouble, And so a wife could be a very gifted and valued counselor to her husband. I know in the White House, different presidents, wives have a lot of input there in some cases because, the intuition, they can see so-and-so and have a read, this person's out to get you, stay away from that person. I think that's more in the political realm, but could happen in a church also. So I'm not here to tell you it is wrong to have that level of confidence in your wife. I think it can be unwise for the situations I would tell you. And again, I've never really discussed this so much with Pastor Schaller, or never heard it taught. But if she is on the receiving end of those confidences, man, she's got to be real careful about what she says, what she lets on to. Someone can come up to her and talk about a situation. She could say, you know what, I don't know anything about that situation, even though she knows all about it, And that was, back to what we were talking about. What you know in the table of organization doesn't go out into the church. What you learn in the church doesn't come into the table. And so I'm just saying there's landmines that you can step on that can cause great, great damage. So the pastor's wife does not have the role of handling communications with the pastor, but the secretary does. Okay? And I would say this. And this may be stated a little bit in the extreme. And also, I'm really teaching it for the first time the way I'm teaching it. So some of this is, I hope it's fresh from God, but it could be fresh from my flesh. So we'll see what it is. But I would never, like if I'm going to ask the pastor's secretary a question, the question I'm going to ask her is, when would it be possible for me to meet with the pastor? You know, when can I get a meeting with him? And that's really about all I have to say to the pastor's secretary. You know, I do not ask her, what does Pastor Schaller think about this? Or can you ask Pastor Schaller this for me? Okay? I don't do that. Okay? And I'm not saying you could never do it. And maybe some pastors want to use their secretary as a conduit for that type of communication. I've told you, I've warned you about that because of the potential for the problems that can come out of that. And the problem is if the pastor's secretary starts making decisions without really asking the guy, knowing what he would think, you know, oh, I know what he would say. I don't want to bother him. He's busy. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to help him by doing this. And that is necessary. There's decisions I make that I do not pass on to Pastor Lange. Okay? There's decisions on occasion Pastor Lange and I make without passing them on to Pastor Schaller. That's, you know, as long as those decisions don't blow up and he still has confidence in us, you know, we're walking down that road. Sometimes the email goes out, gentlemen, I'm going to do this unless you stop me, you know, because I'm pretty confident. I want to keep the ball rolling along, but I'm just double checking. I intend to take this course of action unless I hear from you. That's a legitimate communication. Others are like, I'm strongly recommending this. What do you think? Another one might be, I'm not sure what to do. Option A, B, and C. Which one would you recommend? And then the fourth one is, I got no clue. Help me out. I'm floundering in this situation, you know. So those are the types of things. But do I want to say anything more about this? Yes. Pastor secretaries, be careful about parlaying your role into more than it should be. And those dealing with pastor secretaries, don't put her in a position where she is tempted to make her role into more than it should be. If you need an answer from the pastor, you got to get him. You know, and I hope I say this the right way, but he has to do his job. You know what I'm saying? And that's another danger that can happen. You have, you know, women around the pastor who are sensitive to the pastor. Oh, if you knew what he was going through, you would not be asking him that question. And then because of their knowledge of the man, all of a sudden, you know, all decision-making goes out the window because they have inside knowledge about what's good or bad for him. And so, okay, I cannot touch this situation, and, you know, because this person has this information, you know. And everybody understanding this? Now, sure, in an emergency, absolutely, you know. You know what, and we had that. Pastor Schaller was in the hospital, 6 months ago? He's having stents put in. No communication with Pastor Schaller. And I think Pastor Land stepped in and said, if anybody's talking to him, it's going to be me. But no one visit. And you know, he has an iPad, he can communicate with me, but you do not bombard him while he's in the hospital getting himself repaired, you know. So, I think I could ask you on a final exam, discuss some of the pitfalls related to the pastor's wife and the pastor's secretary as, you know, as they're, you know, functioning within the organization or near the organization, and how can those be avoided? What should we watch out for? How should the person handle themselves? How should those around them handle themselves? You know? So that's fair game for the upcoming final exam that we'll take. So I think we're going to take another break, and I think we're going to kind of come back here at 8:15, so it'll be a 14-minute break, and then we'll go into the final phase tonight. Wrong implement. 8:14. That's a 14. Okay?